so pleased to bring local artist and poet Catherine Weber to the floor to talk about her exhibit, Memory Trees. Tree Memories?
Tree Memories.
Tree Memories. Catherine?
Thank you. This feels really funny. So, as I said to Denise earlier, the reason I made this series of work was out of trauma. So much of what I make is out of trauma. My father died, and my mother cut down all of his trees. And this is true. She and he had had a debate about the trees for a long time and felt that the trees, my mother felt that the trees blocked her view of the lake, which I can tell you definitively they didn't. But when I found out that she'd cut down all of his trees, in the dead of winter, by the way, probably because she was angry because he died, she gave me some of the logs. And she gave me some of the logs because she knew I was so upset that she had cut the trees down. And so she literally handed me some logs, and it was beautiful cherry wood. And there's this artist, his name was Brian Gill Nash, and he had been doing prints of trees similar to these, and had some of these prints in the Smithsonian Institution because the trees themselves were historic trees. They were very old trees, very special trees. So I watched a video of him making prints from historic trees and learned how to do it and started making prints. And the prints were made on sumi rice paper. So I made hundreds of these prints in hundreds of colors and different shapes and sizes. And then I figured that I needed to do something with the prints. So I cut them all out, and I had them all on a table, and I had a bunch of these square panels on a counter in my studio, and I laid the individual prints out, and I spent hours and hours trying to figure out what colors went together, how many to put on a board. You know, I'll put a lot of thought into it. So literally it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I have all these panels and I have all these pieces on them, and they're not affixed to the panel, so just sitting there. And I take a picture and I post it on Facebook at, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I say, so what does anybody think, right? And sure enough, one of my neighbors down the street, she's like, oh, and she makes all these comments about them. Now, when you go and look at these pieces, you'll see that they're covered with a layer of beeswax. And so in order for me to affix these onto the panels, I paint over them hot beeswax. But when I paint with hot beeswax, I have a ventilation system to make sure that the smell of the beeswax is not dangerous. So I turned on my ventilation system to get ready to paint the beeswax, and it blew all of the paper. The hours of putting the paper on all these panels blew right off onto the floor. And then I remembered the Facebook post, and I said, oh, I can go and look at my Facebook post, and I recreated them. But that was just like 3 hours I'm sitting there, literally into the night, going, does this color go with this color? And literally, all on the floor. So these are what I print from. And this sumi rice paper, when it absorbs wax, becomes translucent, so it doesn't look like there's paper. So when you go to look at the pieces, it's hard to see paper. You don't realize that they were individual pieces that were embedded in wax, which was what I really was going for, that these look sort of like they're floating. And one of the first ones I did was something really, this is a test board, so I just practiced on this. And I have a bag of probably 200 more of these that I just kept making them and making them and making them, because every time I had paint colors, I just use up all the pink and do as many as I could. And then I'd use up all, because you're already got this with the ink on it, and you just want to use it up, right? So I have hundreds of them. And this one, everybody says looks like an avocado. But obviously, I've never seen an avocado that big. I don't know if you have. But and this is the beeswax, which is what I put in a hot electric fry pan and melt and paint with. So all of the work at the back has beeswax on it, and all the stuff in the bottom hallway were a second phase of this work in which I took the prints, I sewed them onto cotton and matted and framed them, which was a totally, I have lots of these prints, so I figured I'd try something different. So that is the story of Tree Memories, although I can read the description on my website. Tree Memories is an exploration of the history of trees that have personal meaning to me. Some are from my father's cherry trees, some are from my own ancient copper beech tree. The prints from these trees are more than about their age, but about the history that has passed in their midst. I print them on rice paper, embed them in caustic medium, and mount them on birch panels, all ties to the earth. So it is important to me that the work, all the components, the materials, are natural materials as much as I can. And this work actually has been around for 7 years. But it's not done yet because the stuff downstairs is in this last year. So, does anybody have any questions? It's a wildly busy, we were afraid we were going to break the 50, person mark and get kicked out because.
Catherine, do you ever dye the hot wax, or do you add color to the hot wax and paint with that?
Yes.
I've never done encaustic painting.
Yes, well, you'll have to come to my studio. So the first thing I do, and you can buy chunks like this that are already pigmented, and a piece about this size costs anywhere from $18 to $50 depending on what color they are. Like if they're cadmium red, they're going to be expensive. If they're white, they're going to be expensive. But a less expensive way to have encaustic paint is to get your own bag of beeswax, which you can buy from candle making supply companies. And it's refined so that there's no particles in it from the bees. And then you mix it with something called damar resin, which is like a tree sap, and which hardens the wax. So this right here, if you feel this, it's not sticky at all because it has this damar resin in it. And that's usually 1 part damar resin to 5 parts wax. You can go as far as 8 parts wax if you want it to be softer. So the less resin, the softer the paint. And then I use powdered pigments. So I have jars of powdered pigments, and I mix the powdered pigment with this. And that's far cheaper than buying R&F paints, which are expensive. But there are some colors that you want, like a really good cadmium red or white. And sometimes I buy those, but I went to France 5 years ago, and I filled half a suitcase of pigments from a special pigment store. I actually bought an extra big suitcase so that I had room for the pigments because I know it's going there. And I have enough pigment to make paint for the rest of my life. As long as I have beeswax, I'm good. So today, a 10-pound box of beeswax arrived because I might be sequestered in my house, and I'm going to paint as much as I possibly can. So. And these pieces have been in shows in Newton Library, at, what's that place in Saxonville? Up the hill that, it's at a church. Anyway, I'm blanking on the name of it. It's a hall. It's a hall next to a church.
Yeah, I don't know what church that is. I know what you're talking
Open something. Anyway, it's been
Spirit place.
Open Spirit.
about.
Yeah. So it's been there. They've been around a little bit, but they're holding up. So one of my thoughts was creating patterns with this to maybe, as you can see, this is like ruined. I was thinking of making patterns and maybe making textiles with it. So choosing like the indigo color, which is one of my favorite colors in the series, and try to learn how to make textiles with a consistent print, and then once you make a section of it, then you can repeat it. And they show you how to do this on a website called Spoonflower, and then you can actually make fabric. And my son's curtains are falling down, so I thought maybe I'd try it out.
Shower curtain?
Anything, right? Right. So, were you going to ask a question?
I was going to ask you a question, yeah. So a lot of people are attached to their trees, right? Have you been approached by anyone else to do something like that for them?
Not commissions, but I do sometimes take logs or ask people for some of their trees. I mean, Sarah Butterfield, who lives on Redgate Lane, like practically across the street from you, her husband was out cutting some logs up a couple of years ago. And I had been driving by this tree that had fallen down. I had passed it like for months. And there he is out there, minding his own business, cutting up his log. And I pull over next to him and I said, "Excuse me." And I didn't know him at the time. I know him now. I said, "Could I have some of that wood?" And he looks at me like, "Are you out of your mind?" I said, "And would you mind slicing it for me?" And that sculpture, the one that was hanging in the big tree for Art on the Trails 3 years ago, that was the pieces he had sliced for me. And the middle was rotted out, and I filled the middle with beeswax. And then I put it together, and it hung and spun. It's still in my yard. But the trees have to be, I can't just have people bring me trees. I need the trees to be, it's sort of like people with there's an artist, Lisa Barthelson, who does a lot of work with her own family consumption, like all the stuff from her family. All the stuffed animals or a sculpture, And she's like, "No, don't bring me your junk. Make your own work with your own junk." For me, it's like the tree has to mean something to me. My father's tree, my tree. Whitney Beals has given me some wood from Beals Preserve that I use, a crab apple, and then he tells me what it is. He actually wrote with Sharpie on them what they were, because he's a tree guy, so he knows everything. But I admire, most of my work is very much about trees, so this is one body of work that could probably go on forever. So. And these sort of look like the insides of trees. And they're very delicious.
They were delicious.
Yes. That's all I got. Thank you for coming.